Hello, everyone. I now have 2 p.m. Eastern, so we'll go ahead and get started. So welcome. My name is Philip Ely, and on behalf of the Children, Youth, and Families at Risk Professional Development and Technical Assistance Center, thank you for joining us today. We are pleased to have Dr. Shauna Tominey as our presenter. But before we begin, there are a few administrative announcements I would like to make. A recording of today's webinar will be posted on the SciFAR PDTA Center's website at scifar.org. During the presentation, we ask that you discuss topics in the chat box by using the chat feature. And we ask that if you have a specific question for the presenter, please use the Q&A function as depicted on the screen here. That way we can make sure we don't miss the questions that we'll have out there. At the conclusion of this webinar, a pop-up window will open asking you to participate in a short survey. Please click continue and complete our brief online survey to share feedback on today's presentation, as well as suggestions for future webinar topics. And now it is my pleasure to present our speaker for today. Dr. Shauna Tominey is an associate professor of practice at Oregon State University and the state coordinator for the Oregon Parenting Education Collaborative. As a former early childhood teacher and parenting educator, Shauna blends practical experience with research to develop programs that promote social and emotional skills for children and adults. She is the author of Creating Compassionate Kids: Essential Conversations to Have with Young Children, a contributor for PBS Kids for Parents, and a founding member of Liberated. Her favorite moments come from spending time with her family, learning something new from community, and shared moments that help us see humanity in each other. I love that. So without further ado, Shauna, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Philip, and welcome everybody. It's so good to at least see your names. I know with the webinar format, it's hard for us to see each other and to be together in community in the same way we might be if we were in the same room together, but I really appreciate you being here. I really appreciate you giving up your time, and I hope to see your comments come through in the chat as we start engaging. So my name is Shauna Tominey. My pronouns are she, her, and I feel so honored to be joining you today to talk a little bit about this idea of there is no normal, supporting the everyday emotional ups and downs through the power of connection. And you'll see as we go through that I'm a storyteller. I love to share stories as a way to both to build connection, but also to bring research in what we know about our lives, about how emotions play a role in who we are and how we interact with one another in the world, and taking that research and making it concrete and relating it to what we see in our everyday work, whether you are working directly with children, with families, with youth, with other adults, or all and everyone in your community. So I'd like to start by asking you a question before I dive into my first story that I want to share. And that's this. If you had to choose one word to describe the society that you want for children, for youth, you might even extend this to other adults or adults you work with or support or who live in your community, what would it be? And I'll pull up the chat and see. Inclusive. Thank you. First word. Here we go. Safe, welcoming, loving. Yes. Yeah, keep those words coming. This has become one of my favorite questions to ask any group, because it brings us together in that first moment of looking at what is it we really want when we drill down to what's most important to us. Embracing, kind, understanding, safe, welcoming, strengths-based, embracing, coming up again. When I've asked this question to rooms of family members, parents, caregivers, even to students and to youth, principals, superintendents, they all pick the same words that you did. Oh, I love that. What is strong with this child? Not what is wrong with this child. Yes. And nobody has ever said, when they have to pick that one word, more mathematical or more literate. And yet these are the systems that so much of what we are promoting in educational systems or others are gearing children up for, or what educators and districts and programs are held accountable for. Those are important skills too. But we know, as you know, and what you've put in the chat, that the skills that underlie that society that we all want to see for children, youth, and families is grounded in our social and emotional well-being, in that safety, in that welcoming space, in that inclusivity, in feeling embraced and not just included, but welcomed for who you are and all aspects of your identity and your lived experience. And as we've looked around at the context of society, especially these past few years with, I can even feel my heart rate go up as I look at this picture and think about all that we've experienced as a society in the past few years and continue to, from the known and the unknown, from the pandemic, from George Floyd's murder, from the resurrection of attention to racial and social justice issues that were not new by any means, that generations have been speaking about, have been living through, but came up into our collective conscious one more time, while also facing war, natural disasters. Some of these pictures come from the state that I'm in now, my home state of Oregon, which I should have mentioned. I'm here from Oregon State University on land that was forcibly taken from the Kalapuya people. We faced a lot as a society, and we faced things that have happened again and again throughout history, as well as the everyday, as well as the completely unexpected and unknown. And that's a lot to carry for anyone. And in my work, in working with, initially, as Philip shared, I started as a teacher in early childhood settings. I worked with youth at different levels. I started working with families, and now I tend to work with educators, parenting educators, and more at those systems levels. And so I'm not as well connected with children, aside from those in my immediate community and those in my life. I used to share one particular story that felt really important to me early on, because it was a story that felt true and withstood time in terms of the experience of this moment, of this teacher, of this child. And I thought really deeply about, do I tell that story today? And I've decided to tell it to you. You saw me flip past this chair. I'm going to come back to it. But in past years, when I've told this story, I carried this story at the forefront of my mind. It's a story it's a true story for me. It happened at this point over 20 years ago, but it's a story that rings true today in every classroom, in every relationship with a child, for teachers who are growing their own skills and knowledge and practice. And something that I came to realize as I thought about, what's the story that I want to share today to open up our conversation? And I came back to this one once again, and I thought, I'd like to share this story today to set us up to where we're going in our conversation about our emotions and stress and trauma and emotional intelligence as a superpower. But it's not the story at the forefront of my mind anymore, based on where folks are. So I want to come around to that too. But for now, I'd like to share a little bit of a story. So this chair is symbolic in this story. As I mentioned, this is a story for me from about 20 years ago when I was a teacher. I'd been teaching for a couple of years. And the first early childhood classroom experience I had was in a school where there was tremendous privilege and resources. My very first teaching job, when I was about 18 or 19 in a classroom in a center, was with children connected to a university. It wasn't a lab school, but most of the children there were children of staff and faculty members at a university. And these children had tremendous resources. They had families who were able to be there with them, to even come and take a lunch break and see them. And they had emotional ups and downs, and they had challenges, and they had enough food on the table, and they had warm clothes in the wintertime, and they had the resources that they need, even if their families had those emotional ups and downs that we all do. A few years later, I found myself in a very different experience. I had married into the military, We had moved at a time, actually in 2001, when my husband was commissioned into the Army, and September 11th happened, and we were looking for a place where we could be stationed, where he could be stationed, where I could potentially have a job, go to school, do something in terms of furthering some of my own goals too, while he ultimately spent several years deployed. And we moved to the middle of the country. We were living in Kansas near Fort Riley in Manhattan. And I was invited to serve as a long-term substitute in a classroom as a way to save up money for school, as a way to continue my education, as a way to keep connected with the community and continue working with children. So I jumped at the chance. I was so excited. I was in my early 20s and I thought, yes, I'm comfortable here. I love teaching. I love being in the space. And I'll tell you that this classroom was very different than the one I'd come from. The resources were much fewer. We had a classroom in a trailer out back behind another school building. And there were 12 children in this class. All of the children in the class were experiencing tremendous challenges in their lives, whether they had family members who were deployed, as I did at the time. Many were experiencing poverty. Many were experiencing housing insecurity and food insecurity. Some incarceration of one or more parents. And in this classroom of 12 children, one was a girl and 11 were boys. And I will never forget one of those boys in particular. I don't think I'll ever forget any of their names. I'll never forget their faces, but I will really never forget Jesse. Jesse was the smallest of these children. He was the youngest, but he was the toughest. Jesse was that child who would rip up somebody else's artwork if he got mad. He was 4 years old, by the way. Jesse was that child who would knock over somebody's blocks. Jesse was that child who would spit at a teacher if he got upset. Do any of you know Jesse? I suspect you might. And what I saw in coming in as a long-term sub for another teacher on maternity leave was, I was newer, I was younger, I didn't have as much experience as some of the other teachers, and I also didn't know my place yet in the classroom. And so I came in from that place of wanting to find my place, wanting to understand where I fit in, wanting to see how I could best serve and support, because it was very clear that the other teachers in the room were incredibly stressed. As I mentioned, we had few resources. We had a very small space that served as our space for group time, as our space for blocks and manipulative play, as our space for story time, as our space for snack and meal time. We had one space. And down at the end of a little hallway was our bathroom with a very small sink and kitchen. And there was something else at the end of that hallway. And I showed you a picture of what that was. At the end of that hallway was a chair. And I bet you can guess whose chair that was. Day after day in stepping into this classroom, I came in and I saw, as I mentioned, some very stressed teachers, very stressed educators. And the day would get going and something would happen. And usually that something revolved around Jesse. Jesse would knock over someone's blocks and a teacher would take him by the arm and say, Jesse, that's not appropriate in school, and take him by the arm and march him down the hall and sit him in the chair. And then after some period of time, they'd bring him back. And then Jesse would spit on somebody and a teacher would say, Jesse, that's not appropriate at school, and take him by the arm and march him down the hall and sit him in the chair. And it happened again and again. And what I saw was that when Jesse was absent, the children would cheer. Nobody's going to ruin my stuff today. Jesse's not here. And when Jesse was absent, the teachers cheer. Oh, thank goodness Jesse's not here today. This day is going to be so much easier than it would have been. And as I mentioned, I was relatively young and new to teaching at that time. And I didn't have the knowledge I have now of trauma, of stress, of strategies to deal with that. But I did come in and I saw my friends and colleagues as teachers who were wonderful people who loved all of the children in the classroom, including Jesse and especially Jesse. And they were burnt out and they didn't know what to do. And so they had built one tool in their toolbox to manage Jesse, to pull him out, to sit him in the chair, to pull him away, and then to let him come back. And nothing was changing. They were burnt out. They were stressed. This wasn't the only challenge they faced in life or even in the classroom. And I watched week after week. And after a few weeks, I built up a little bit of courage. And I thought, maybe I could do something now. Maybe they'd let me do something a little bit different with Jesse. Maybe since I don't feel the same stress and burnout, I haven't been here for 6 months like they have. I'm new. Maybe I could do something a little bit differently with Jesse and I could change his day. Okay, so I was so excited. I went to the cabinet and I opened it up and I looked for something new. And I went to the other teachers and I said, would it be okay if I was the one who greeted Jesse today? What do you think they said? Yeah. You want to greet Jesse? Go for it. Today? Every day? Yeah, please. Somebody else take this on. So I said, okay. And I felt this renewed, energy and hope. Got the activity out that we hadn't done before in class. Set it all up. And I waited for Jesse to walk in. And when Jesse walked into the classroom, I said, Jesse, I'm so glad to see you. Because how often had he heard that? Not in a long time. Never in the time that I'd been there in the classroom. Jesse, I'm so excited to see you. I got out this new game from the cabinet that we've never played in class. And I was hoping that you would be the first one to play it with me. And Jesse looked down at the table, saw what I'd set out. He looked up at me with my hopeful face. Looked down again. And he said to me, I don't want to play your motherfucking game. And I said, Jesse, that's not appropriate at school. And I grabbed him by the arm and I marched him down the hall and I sat him in that chair. Oh, yeah, you might have thought this had a different ending. Me too. Me too. So here I was, sitting back at this chair with Jesse in it, with his arms crossed, looking up at me with daggers in his eyes. Have you ever seen that look in a child's eyes? Just daggers, staring up at me with his arms crossed. And I was standing there looking down at him with my arms crossed too, and feeling upset because this isn't what I planned. This isn't what I wanted to happen. I was going to be the one who changed something today for Jesse. I was going to be the one who wasn't burned out, who made a new plan, who did something a little bit different, who changed Jesse's day and gave him care in a way that folks who were burnt out couldn't. But when my plan didn't work at that moment, I let myself get triggered and I let myself follow through with the one tool I'd seen everybody else use with Jesse, to take him by the arm, to march him down the hall and sit him in that chair. And now here we are. And when I reflect back on that moment, and you might even hear in me 20 years ago, I still carry these feelings of thinking about that moment and telling that story. And I could feel myself get my heart rate elevated, feel the tension building up. You probably see it in my shoulders, standing there. And quite honestly, the upset I thought I felt at Jesse was probably a lot more upset with myself. Some embarrassment, disappointment, discouragement. And I stood there and reality started to sink in of, well, what do I do now? What do the other teachers do when they're back here? Do they talk to him? How long do they wait before he can go back? What should I do? What will work? What will help? And I stood there with my arms crossed and I started to think about everything that I knew about Jesse. What I knew about Jesse was that his mom had left, his dad was in jail, and Jesse was being raised by his grandparents who didn't expect they would be raising Jesse and 3 teenage cousins at that point in their life. They didn't have a lot of resources. They had their own mobility and health challenges, and they were raising 4 children. Jesse was spending his days as the only young child at home, playing first-person shooter games on, I think the Xbox was relatively new at that time. And I started to think about that. And I thought through Jesse's story and the things that I'd heard. And I looked down at Jesse, and the way that I was looking at him changed. Because in carrying his story and reminding myself of his story in that moment, I looked down from, this was such a perfect comment that was in the chat, from seeing Jesse and looking at him like here was the problem, to seeing him as a little boy. And I looked at him and my thoughts changed. And I thought, he's just a little boy. He's 4 years old. And carrying so much. And I dropped down on my knees and I said, Jesse, do you want a hug? And Jesse fell into my arms and started to sob. He wanted to be loved. Look at your words. He wanted to be safe. He wanted to be embraced, understood, and welcomed. And what we were doing was we were adultifying him. We were looking at him as needing to show up in a certain way, needing to manage the weight of the world in a certain way, skills that he had not developed, skills that we should never expect a young child to have without adults around them, bringing those skills and practicing and holding them. He wanted to be loved. He needed to be held. He needed to be supported, not pulled away and punished for essentially what we saw as acting out, expressing his emotions and that need he had any way that he could. And so I think of Jesse a lot because it's this moment in me that humbled me as a teacher to react, to have one of those moments that I didn't feel good about. I didn't know what to do with it. I didn't have the tools. I didn't have the skills. And I stepped back and I learned from Jesse in that moment. And quite honestly, all of the things that we had tried in the classroom, all the things that the other teachers had tried, nothing was working, nothing was changing until we stepped back and really made a point of saying, what does Jesse really need? He needs to be loved and seen and supported and to feel like he belongs. And when we started finding ways to do that for Jesse, that's when other behaviors started to change, because that's when he could start to build some skills to say, I'm hurting right now. I'm upset. I'm angry. I need help. I need love. I need a hug. And we could offer it. We could ask in a different way. So as I mentioned, Jesse's story is one I've carried for a long time as this example of what happens in our emotions and one that I want to carry forward. But I also want to name that as long as I've been telling this story and reflecting on the story, and the way I reflect on it has changed over time as I've learned more too, there are a lot of other stories that are coming up now. So for educators, for parenting educators, for those in social services and family support, something that I'm hearing more and more now too is it's not just that children are not okay right now, or that families are not okay with the types and level of stress that we're seeing, but we're not okay. And I want to hold on to that thought, because if you've come into this room today, this virtual room that we've created together, and carry any of those feelings, or have folks around you carrying those feelings, or have children or families carrying those feelings, I want to bring that into the space so that we can address it a little bit. All right. So in holding on to that story, I want to talk a little bit about what happens in our body and our mind when we have these stress feelings. You know, in that moment, in that story I just told, there are so many instances of that stress coming out. One of a teacher, an educator, me, or the other educators in the room being triggered in those moments. One of Jesse being triggered in little moments where maybe the message he was getting from other children was he didn't belong. Or maybe there are things that he wanted to do and he couldn't, and he was frustrated and it was coming out in other behaviors or in other ways. But he was also carrying tremendous trauma in his life and chronic stress and long-term stress. Just as so much of our society is right now, we have come through a societal trauma with the pandemic. And that's also opened our eyes to some of the other pandemics that come with racism and systems of oppression that so many carry with them and have carried with them on a daily basis. So I want to talk a little bit about what's going on, because this helps us come to ideas and solutions as well. That idea of that stress response being like running from a bear in the moment, dodging a bus, moving out of danger, saving ourselves in that moment. When we have those fight, flight, or freeze moments, sometimes we don't acknowledge freeze, but that's a response too. I've heard a number of teachers saying and educators saying that they've had young children who have been hiding under desks more so than in the past. That's a hide, a freeze. That's a stress response. Or hearing that we're seeing in I serve on our local school board here, actually in the school district that I grew up in, and to hear from teachers and from students that the types of emotional and behavioral challenges students are experiencing look different than in the past following the pandemic. That there's more aggressive behaviors coming out. There's also more internalizing and fearful and anxious behaviors and emotional experiences coming out. These are all part of that same system. And we'll get into in a moment talking about how the experience we've gone through with the pandemic and continue to go through has contributed to that, and also what we may be able to do in each of our roles. So when we think about that stress response, there are a couple of things that are often talked about. It's that adrenaline kicks in and it makes you faster and it makes you stronger. So if something happens and it's triggering in the moment, or something happens and you need to jump out of danger, you've got this spike in those stress hormones. That adrenaline pumps through, it constricts your blood vessels. Kind of like if you imagine children like standing or squeezing a hose in the summertime to get the water flowing through faster or more strongly. That's what our blood vessels do. It speeds up our blood flow to our muscles and our organs. It makes us stronger, faster, more alert in the moment, more greater attention to threats, what's happening around us, how do we save ourselves, and more action-minded. Now, our cortisol inhibits that prefrontal cortex. So those of you who talk about executive function, self-regulation, making good choices and planning, that cortisol actually inhibits that part of our thinking. We don't need to think about which exit do I go out of right now. If the fire alarm goes on, I want my body to react and just get me out of the door as fast as I can. So we actually shut down some of that reasoning in that moment. The other thing that happens with cortisol is that it slows down non-essential functioning. What does that mean? Digesting your breakfast. You don't need that if what you need is 3 seconds to get yourself out of danger. You can start digesting breakfast again after you get out of danger. But if it's momentary, we can stop some of that. Let's slow down the energy and effort that your body puts into your immune functioning, your digestion, your growth. If it's momentary, that's not harmful. That preserves your energy, pulls it together, and gets you out of that moment, or lets you respond to that danger in the moment, as long as it's short. Now, on the way down, again, if that stress spike is short, you stop your growth, you put a pause on your immune functioning, slow down your digestion. You don't need the energy there. You need to get out of there. You need to fight. You need to flee. You need to freeze. As long as it's momentary or short, on the way down, your body does something amazing. What you were just doing, quite honestly, is damage. It's damage to your body. But if it's short-lived, then it's adaptive. It helps you. So it's okay. It's a trade-off because your body actually heals that damage. You release oxytocin on the way down. Oxytocin comes from connection. It comes from, you can get oxytocin released in your body from sharing a smile or a laugh or feeling like you belong and connecting with those who care about you. You can actually bring on that oxytocin release. And it happens when you calm yourself. You're taking those deep breaths, clearing out the cortisol, bringing your heart rate down, bringing in that oxytocin as well, and that release in your body. There are receptors in your heart for oxytocin that heal the stress-related damage that was related to what just happened on the way up. Oxytocin release also lowers that feeling of stress and anxiety. Those feelings and that churning of stress and anxiety, they help you do something. They help you move. They help you fight back. They help you make a different choice and get out of there or do something differently or advocate or fight for something you believe in. But we've got to come down to, because it's damaging to stay there too long without a balance. Now, the problem is when somebody experiences chronic stress, like Jesse in his everyday life, like so many other children and so many other families, and even more so during the pandemic, where if chronic stress happens and it's one spike after another, something happens in our body. Our stress response doesn't stay to one up being balanced by one down. Where you go up, you stay there just long enough to get out of trouble or to meet a need or a crisis or a challenge, and then your body brings you down, healing yourself all along the way. What happens instead in chronic stress is this spike up, and notice this dark line. Your body starts to sense that you're living in a stressful environment and that you need support to meet that need. So even with the threat of stress, even if someone looks at you in that way that reminds you of a stressor, even if you enter a room where you have experienced stress or trauma, even if you open up your work email, and if that has been linked to stress for you too, maybe even just opening it up if nothing there is stressful, or hearing the voice of a certain person, that alerts your stress response system. And your stress response system adapts. So it starts to spike sooner, even before there's a threat, even with a hint of a threat. And then it holds you there longer. See that dark line? So that if you had spikes one after another, you're just holding up there and you're waiting up there and holding on to that enhanced energy, to that reactivity, to that readiness to go, flee, fight, what you need in that moment, what a child needs in that moment to survive. The problem is you're not getting all that healing. So you're staying there longer, more damage is being done. Your immune functioning is down. Growth, especially for children, is down. Your digestion, that churning you might feel, that inability to just feel settled in your eating and digestion, may be put into chaos. And then not only are you being spiked up sooner, it's taking longer for your body to come down from those moments because it's holding you up there with the thought, with the idea that another stressor is right around the corner. So let's just stay in this place so that you're ready. And the problem is being there at that peak of stress long-term leads to a lack of trust because you're looking around for a threat. Your body has you not thinking clearly and focused and looking for the threat that could come at any time. That's part of preserving yourself. It's part of a child or a youth or an adult looking around to make sure they're safe because anything could be a problem or a challenge. And that can create lack of trust, a reluctance to build relationships for those same reasons, increased fearfulness, hypervigilance, assumption of negative intent, because that's the space that we're in, looking for the challenge, looking for the stress, looking for the harm, heightened reactivity, longer time required to calm down, inability to focus on learning or new information. It's not as important as these more pressing concerns of what could happen around me at any moment. And something for us to think about is that, as I mentioned, oxytocin in those downward sections of those spikes, what we need to calm our bodies down, to bring them back down, because being in heightened stress actually is linked to a whole host of health challenges, let alone social challenges as well, and reduced length of life. This is a tremendous stressor on your stress response system and your body that your body can't handle long term. And we don't want that for you or for the children and families that you serve either. We need you. So what do? Well, compassion and connection. We look for these opportunities to bring together that healing pathway. One of the things that happened during the pandemic is that we taught ourselves, and we had to, for physical safety, for health and safety, we taught ourselves to pair anxiety, to pair worry, to pair fear with connection with others. We had to pull back. And something I've heard in working with family service professionals around the country is that they've said, many have said, I was really thankful that I knew who my people were, that I had folks to isolate with or connect with. Those became my people, my trusted people, or I knew who they were. Or others said I was isolated and I had nobody. And for others, especially children and youth, screens became a lifeline to connection. And it's not the same. It helped. It helped to create that portal and that connection to others in a way that was physically safe for our bodies, but it's not the same as those in-person meaningful connections that we build that actually contributes to healing in our bodies. Youth are missing that, and they've replaced it with other ways to connect. And so thinking about what do we do? What do we learn from this? We've got to lean in. We've got to look at ways that over the last couple of years in particular, because of the need for physical safety, isolation, and separation, we've actually taught ourselves and our bodies and our minds to pair anxiety and fear with connection. And that's been exacerbated by there are wonderful things that have come from social media, and there are really challenging things. This is one of the really challenging things that has come with that, is how easy it is to create division and opposing narratives rather than sitting down with folks and seeing them for who they are, hearing their stories, and finding a point of connection. All right, so I want to bring this back now to thinking about emotions. And I invite you to open up your chat. We talked about how you'd like children, youth, and families to feel safe, welcoming, embraced, seen from that strengths-based perspective, seeing what's strong with them. What are all the emotions that they might experience in a typical day? Go ahead and add some of those to the chat. What are all the feelings that they might have? Curiosity, yeah. Worry. Oh, a whole list here. Joy, frustration, sadness, anger, frustration, and joy. I love that there's a blend of those that we typically think of as pleasant or those that we think of as unpleasant. Stress and frustration, loneliness, yeah. Hunger, yeah. Heard, hopeful. Absolutely. And if we think of those that you or your colleagues might experience in a typical day, what would you add to that? You might pick the same things. And just a shout out to my friend Michelle Crable on the call. Belonging. Yeah, one of those that we hope for. Tired. Yeah, and if we weren't so tired, we could probably come up with a whole long list that would fill the chat for them and for us. So let's dive in a little bit and let's think about this. So connection is this tremendous antidote to some of what we're seeing as stressors and challenges, to really listening deeply, to really connecting and looking for those chances in the ways that we can, in the ways that we're comfortable. I want to dive into talking about different emotions, because there's also been a narrative in when we talk about emotional intelligence that what that's about, or what social and emotional skills are about, is about helping folks feel happy or feel good or feel joyful. But the real truth is the human experience involves all of these emotions. And in fact, when we pay attention to them, they tell us something and they teach us something, and we can use them to help benefit us when we listen to them. So let's do something just a little bit fun, a little bit silly for a moment before we dive into emotional intelligence and find your emotional intelligence superhero name. We're going to take on harnessing emotions as a superpower. So let's hear it. What are your superhero names? You can add one feeling you are having plus the last thing you ate. So for me, that would be excited oatmeal, or you could go with the color of your shirt, the closest object to your right, which for me is purple mouse, or your Star Wars name if you really need a mental challenge right now. And for me, my Star Wars name would be Tosha Liuge. Go ahead and add them in the chat. Love it. Tired Rice Krispies. Content turnover. Gray cup. Worry chicken. Numb carrot. Okay. Woman king. Woman king. Forest. Anxious muffin. Okay. This actually can tell us a lot too, just in terms of some of the feelings that are coming up. You're carrying a lot too, in terms of all those that you serve and support and in your own lives. And that's something that it's really important for us to acknowledge. Exhausted pillow. Nice to have the pillow close by, though. I hope you get to use it at some point. Thanks for sharing. So now, carry on. Oh, we've got a Star Wars name challenge here. The Mika Marby, perhaps. Think about this. Carry those superhero names forward. And think about this. If we were together in the same room and had the opportunity, this would be a great turn and talk to the person next to you. But this is an activity you can carry with you, with your colleagues, even with youth or children, or with families. How have these emotions helped us this year? Can you name one way that anxiety has been helpful for you? You know, we often think of anxiety as challenging, that it makes us feel upset. Sometimes it makes us overwhelmed to the point that we can't get stuff done. But how can anxiety also be helpful? What about anger or frustration? Joy or calm? Relief? Sadness or disappointment? Pick one of these emotions and add an example of how that emotion has been helpful to you or helpful to someone in your life this year. Yeah, and Philip just reminded that you're welcome to raise a hand if you'd like to speak out loud. Forgot that we could do that in a webinar format, so that would be wonderful if anyone would like to do so. Yeah. Tells me I need to set better boundaries, self-care and rest. Yeah. Better relations related to joy and calm. Yeah, when we pay attention to our emotions, sometimes they tell us what we need or what we're missing when they come up. Let's see if any others come through. Anxiety of late has helped me be able to understand my own limits and more understanding of others. Thank you for sharing. And I'll read these out loud just so folks can hear them on the webinar if they watch the recording later. So each of these feelings, it's interesting because when I've offered webinars and classes and workshops in the past, folks often have stigma associated with some of these, particularly anxiety, although we're seeing youth anxiety levels continue to increase. And oftentimes the story that folks tell themselves is, I'm an anxious person and I'm trying to stop that, or I'm trying to get rid of it, or I'm trying to be different. And when you empower folks to say, you know, that anxiety, it may be a part of who you are. Some of us have more anxious temperaments, or some of us are more prone to reactivity and we react a little bit more strongly or a little faster. Some of us carry a little more sadness with us just in the way that we view the world, and that may be part of who we are. And I don't want to dismiss that there are folks who also may need clinical support or other forms of treatment support, while also that sometimes it's helpful for folks to hear too that it's okay, that those feelings are part of who you are and you can use them to help you think about, what do you need in this moment? If you're anxious, is it because you have a lot to do? And maybe you can benefit from some support or structure or planning, or maybe that anxiety is going to help you get stuff done. Or same with that level of sadness. Some sadness is okay. It helps us grieve or recognize when we need something or are craving connection. It's when that sadness gets very, very deep into depression, where we may not be able to get support we need, where it starts to impact our daily lives, where we may need more support also, but also empowering folks to think about, how do these emotions help you? And how are you recognizing that? I see a couple of others coming through this. Relief, feeling of successfulness. Yeah. Understanding we are all going through something. Yeah. Even if we, it's sometimes we also step back and look at all the things we have to be grateful for and think, I shouldn't have these feelings because I have a lot to be grateful for. I have a steady job right now. I have my daughter in school in a place where she's safe. We have good health in our family right now. I shouldn't be worrying about all of this, or I shouldn't give this my thought or attention, or there's so many others who are struggling so much more than I am. We have to also acknowledge our own feelings while recognizing that that's true too. Oh, and I love hearing that comment of my husband has been helping me regulate my emotions in the last year. My anxiety is much better and I'm finding joy in the small things. Right? Yeah. That brings up a really important point too of co-regulation. So often what has been taught to teach is self-regulation, learning to pull yourself up, learning to manage your own emotions, learning like Jessie, a child, to say kindergarten readiness, you need to be ready with these skills, with self-regulation, with social and emotional skills before you get to kindergarten or as you get started, and then we never talk about it again. And that's a problem because we need co-regulation throughout our lives. All right, one more comment I'll read and then we'll move on for our last few minutes. Oh, Inside Out, yes. And Steven Universe are great movies and shows that teach this too, how it's okay to have these feelings and how we can understand them in ourselves with compassion and connection with others. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. So to bring this around, what does all of this show us? That our emotions, they're not necessarily good or bad. They may feel good or bad for us in the moment. They may feel positive or negative or pleasant or unpleasant, but they're all part of being a human being. They're all part of the human experience, and we can use them as information when we pay attention to them. What's happening in my body right now? Why am I having these thoughts, or what happened that led to this moment and these thoughts and feelings that I'm having, so that I can problem solve around what to do with it? Do I use it to help me advocate for something, to look for a change, or to help a family recognize that maybe what they're asking for is a change, or that maybe a child's behaviors are actually an ask for help or support in a different way than they're receiving. Emotions are information. We can't always decide how we feel in any given moment, but we can build skills and we can help teach skills that help us show and express and name and use our emotions in different ways. So emotional intelligence, just that thought to carry forward with you, which you may have already come in with, that this is a superpower. And it's a superpower to be able to recognize and value every one of our emotions as a part of us, not as something that we have to overcome, not as something that we have to stand against, not as something that we have to rally behind. There's been some efforts that focus on, well, it's all about happiness. And then we converge on toxic positivity rather than really recognizing where we are and just saying, put a smile on it. Let's fake it till you make it. That does a tremendous disservice to you, to the children and families that you support, rather than meeting them where they are, rather than you coming to the table and meeting them where you are as well. I remember also early on in teaching, being told to put a smile on my face always and fake it till you make it. And I learned later on what a disservice that was to children. It's one thing to come in and mope around all day and never address it. But it's another to come in and say, well, Miss Shauna's feeling a little bit sad today. Maybe, I wonder if I could think about some strategies that would help me in this moment, because I really want to be here with you. And I want to do these activities with you, and I'm excited to be here. And I think maybe I need to take a few moments and take some deep breaths. Maybe we could do that together. Maybe a hug would help. Maybe a drink of water. Maybe realizing I have some things on my mind and I think I'm going to take them and put them aside or in my imaginary backpack and come back to them afterwards so I can really focus on our time together and be present. Not only does that model that all emotions are okay, but it models strategies or even involves others in problem solving with us. We need that co-regulation. So in supporting and modeling social and emotional skills, part of that is being a leader and seeing yourself as a leader in those spaces. What you do, everything from your mannerisms to facial expressions to the ways that you express yourself or talk about your emotions. You don't have to be perfect, and you never will be, no matter how hard you work at it. We're human beings. We can't be. But the more that you can address it and find those little moments of vulnerability to share with others as you talk about your own process and growth, what you're feeling, what you're growing, and what you're trying, serves as a role model for others. I've had some interesting, I think just in my own learning and growth process, something else that I've come around to is that we each have different areas that are more and less comfortable for us to do this. So when I'm working with young children or teaching in a classroom or working with community groups, it's so much easier for me to model these skills than it is with my own family. And I had an experience over the holidays where I come from a family with quite a few layers of intergenerational trauma. And I watched a moment of this unfold with one of the current generations linking in with one of the past generations. And it triggered me back to my childhood of sitting there and thinking and looking around at who I consider the elders of the room and thinking, just like I did when I was a child, how come nobody's doing anything? How come nobody's saying anything? This isn't okay. And I had this moment of taking a breath and looking around and saying, I'm that adult now. I'm that adult now for the children in this room who needs to find a way to find my courage and with kindness and compassion, stop what's happening and say something. And I did. And it took a lot. And it was one of the most courageous acts for me that I think I've ever had to make in my life. But that act opened up more for me. So looking around and seeing, who are the leaders? Who are we looking at to be the models? Well, it's you. It's all of us. Part of this work is fostering environments where all youth, where all children and all adults belong. And there have been approaches to saying, well, as long as we talk about feelings and kind of stay neutral on that, everyone has feelings. Let's talk about feelings, who's felt disappointed or sad or happy, and let's build community like that. It's not enough. It's not enough because we don't all have the same access to those feelings in our lives when we're dealing with systemic racism, systems of oppression, so many messages that might say who belongs, who doesn't, in terms of all the different aspects of our identity, culture, language, lived experience, ability. We have to name it and show that everybody is welcome by naming how important each part of our identities are, that we all carry multiple identities, and especially for those with institutionally marginalized identities, if we're not naming that everybody is welcomed for who you are, for who you love, for your abilities, for your race, for your gender, for all the things that you've lived through and that you might carry that nobody even knows about, for mental health, we have to name it. We have to talk about it to normalize that everybody belongs. And we have to acknowledge that there is no and there never was a normal. There were so many cries after the pandemic to go back to normal. There was no normal. Sometimes normal meant the status quo, or it meant one way of doing or teaching or learning or talking about things. Who was being left out of that normal? We have to question that and understand that there truly is and never has been a normal. We have to meet folks where they are. We have to meet one another where we are and open our minds to different ways of showing up and learning together in co-regulation. The final note that I'll just share is that we also in this field need to re-envision self-care. There's been so much talk about you're carrying so much, you're carrying so many other folks' emotions. Practice self-care to take care of yourself. We don't do that well. We do not do self-care in this field, but we take good care of one another. We take care of our families. We take care of our colleagues. We take care of children, youth, families, the people in our community, our pets. Lean into those moments where we can practice collective care, community care, and that is what's going to promote healing, especially for folks who self-care is another act of work for. It's more planning, it's more time, it's one more thing to add to an already overly full plate. So I will end with this quote, that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. And I hope today that in coming together, in a little bit of shared story time, in a little bit of affirmation, that I've done something to either uplift or elevate or add or strengthen, or even just affirm the tools in your toolbox. I'm so grateful for all of you and the absolutely critical work you do in our society. Thank you so much, and I'd be glad to stay in touch. Thank you, Philip.
So let's give our presenter a big virtual round of applause or hand claps and all that. And I see Rochelle had her hand up and then it went away. So Rochelle, if you can do me a favor, if you got something to say, please raise your hand again so it makes it easier for me to find you. There we go. So I just gave you some permissions if you wanted to say something real quick. And if not, that's fine. Well, again, like everyone else saying in the comments, I just want to say thank you so much. It was absolutely amazing. You had me laughing and crying and everything else at the same time. So I'm pretty even keeled, so that's kind of hard to do. So thank you so much for that. And thank you all for being here today. We really appreciate you. Again, just a reminder, there will be a pop-up and please take that quick survey. Also, a couple of announcements. One, for current SciFar grantees, don't forget, we will be in Phoenix, Arizona this year for our professional development event. So I look forward to seeing you all May 23rd and 24th down there in Phoenix. Registration is open. Please go to the scifar.org website to get more information about reserving your room and doing the registration. Also, another big announcement, we are currently looking for coaches. So if you know anybody who you think will be a good coach for the CIFAR grantees, please let them know that we are currently looking for coaches. Have them contact me. My email address is right there. The window is closing on February 23rd. From that time, we're going to try to move quickly with bringing some new coaches on, doing on onboarding, with having them to actually start coaching new sites around the August-September timeframe. So again, if you know somebody that you think would be good, please send them my way. We are excited to bring new people on. With all that being said, once again, thank you so much for being here with us today. And again, thank you for our presenter. Again, it was amazing. So I loved it. Thank you so much. And fill out the website. And we look forward to seeing you later on at more webinars and more events that we do for the CIFAR PDTA Center. Thank you so much and have a good day.